afternoon and welcome once again to the Alumni Special. My name is Dilly MacFarlane, and during the coming weeks I'll be talking with some Mount alumni and other Mount St. Vincent University personnel who are connected with alumni functions. Today I'm happy to welcome as my guest Carol Goodwin-Hatt, who is the groundskeeper here at the Mount and a gardener extraordinaire. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Dilly.
Carol, I've been wanting to ask you something. What do gardeners do in the wintertime?
Well, that's a fair question. A lot of people wonder that. Here at the Mount, we work outside usually right up until Christmas because Nova Scotia is pretty good weather-wise, and we usually don't see too much snow much before the end of the month. Of course, this year was an exception. But by the time we get back after Christmas, get all the loose ends tied up from last year, try and get everything organized and bought, decide what flowers are going to go in what beds, what trees are going to go where. And of course, I have to go on vacation somewhere south. By the time all that is over with, it's spring and we're outside again.
Right. How many crew work with you, Carol?
We have all Mount students on our staff, so they're all summer seasonal. And we have in the vicinity of 8 students every summer, depending on if we pick up any grant projects or not.
I see. Do you have anything special planned, any sort of special projects? I know that you have been working on a special project over the last few years, and our viewers may note, particularly the alumni viewers, will note that during our Jubilee celebrations, we recognized the official opening of the Sister Mary Lou Gavin Arboretum.
Yeah.
What is an arboretum, Carol? What's the difference between an arboretum and a bunch of trees?
A little grove?
Yeah.
Well, an arboretum is actually a collection of woody plants, so it's trees, shrubs, vines. And the idea of an arboretum is that it's sort of like a living tree museum where people can come and look at trees and shrubs and see how they grow and decide, hopefully before they buy things for their yard, whether or not the things that they see here are really what they want. When you go to a garden center, everything is cute and little in a pot, and sometimes you really need to see what they look like a few years later before you ever buy them.
Right. Do we have any sort of interesting or unusual trees or plants here on our Mount campus?
We've got quite a few. We have about 70 species of rhododendron. A lot of them are still very small because we imported them from the U.S. only a couple of years ago. But once they start to grow, we'll have many more varieties than are available locally at the garden centers. And we have some unusual evergreens, and we have some nice shade trees that aren't really too commonly available. So we have some things that are unusual, but for the most part, the best way to show people what they can do with plants is to show them with plants that they can buy, so that's what we've done.
Here at the Mount, that there are some very old trees, but there are also lots of newer, younger trees, and almost all of them are labeled and identified.
Yes, most of the trees on campus are labeled with their botanical names and their common names. And that way, if you see something that you really like, especially when things are in bloom, or in the fall when they get really nice color, that's when people notice them the most. When they're green, they all look the same, I guess, to anyone else but me. And so that's a way of them identifying them and then being able to go to the garden center and say, I saw this particular plant and I'd like to have one, please.
Now, you started working here at the Mount in what, 1976?
76.
10 years.
10 years.
Now, when you arrived, had there been a groundskeeper that did the sort of thing that you do, the sort of gardening type of things that you do?
When I came here, there was really only one garden, and that was the one in front of Everestus, that big long bed, and it was a rose bed at the time. They didn't have annual beds per se. They used to put a lot of annuals, I think, in that rock garden behind Everestus. But for the most part, most of the gardens just weren't there. The fellow that was looking after the grounds before I came was a gentleman named Sam Myers, and he had been on the maintenance staff before that and had filled that position. So really, when I came, it was the first time that they had looked for someone who was a trained horticulturist per se, instead of someone who had gardening experience and was hired in that capacity.
I know that we here at the Mount are particularly proud of our grounds. I know that visitors never fail to mention how beautifully kept the grounds are, how remarkably free of litter and what a fine job you do. And basically, I know that you have been recognized by some of your professional colleagues. For instance, you were awarded, I think, a special award by the Grounds Management Society.
They have a competition every year, and we entered the campus one year in the university category. And the University of Hawaii at Maui placed ahead of us. But I mean, they have climate in their favor. So I was really pleased with that showing.
Well, I think that is wonderful. Is this sort of, do you compete with other institutions according to for instance, the University of Hawaii? I'm sure they have a considerable budget to allow for their gardening and so on.
Well, when they lump you in, it's broken down into categories like office buildings or universities or private residences. Like they have 12 categories.
I see.
But when they do the judging, of course, your geographic location and your budget. I mean, they ask you, you have to give them all that information. And it certainly is considered when they decide who really deserves to be pointed out from everyone else.
Well, we're pretty proud of the fact that you received international recognition on the basis of how wonderful our campus looks. I started to ask you about when you first arrived, what would you say is the major difference between what the campus, the grounds looked like 10 years ago and what they look like now?
Well, that's a tricky question. There's a lot of buildings now that weren't there before. So physically, the campus has changed a lot. Also, there are a lot more students now than there were then. And as more and more people are using the campus, it gets a little bit harder to keep the same way. There's certainly a lot of new trees and shrubs. For the most part, none of the buildings really were landscape per se. Seton wasn't at all. There's that huge old ash that's down in front of the building by the area where the handicap parking is.
Oh yes, that's a beautiful tree.
That tree's about 180 years old.
Oh my.
Yeah, that's one of our older ones on campus. And other than that, there was nothing done around Seton. It was sodded and that was it. And of course, Everestus was landscaped when they planted it, or when they built the building in the 40s. They put those shrubs in. And a sizzy had been done when it was constructed. But other than that, there wasn't really, the campus hadn't been developed the way it is now, that's for sure.
I know that in my role as alumni officer, I have been a party to a number of tree planting ceremonies. And I know that since in the short time that I've been here, there's been a fair number of them. How many do you suppose that you have planted trees to commemorate a certain occasion or in memory of someone? How many have there been?
Well, for the first few years that I was working here, we didn't have any tree plantings. And when Michelle Crow was alumni officer, she and I talked about it, and it was actually her that got the ball rolling. And we started it by having what we called Green Thumb Day one fall. And we had gardening workshops. We had speakers come in, and we planted trees that day. We put in one for Sister Mary Albertus. We planted about 4 or 5 trees that day for various people. And then once we did that, then people saw trees with people's names on them, and they wanted to know how they could do it. And actually, you know, there's a lot of people, even not necessarily associated with the Mount, that are interested in having a tree planted if someone dies. A lot of people want to give gift trees to the city, specifically in the public gardens. But the layout in the public gardens is very rigid, and they can't accommodate any more plantings. So sometimes they'll refer people to us for tree plantings, and I never say no to a tree planting, that's for sure. I brought a photograph. You haven't seen this. I just got it in the mail. Lots of times students will send me little things like that. Do you know where this tree is? Whatever became of this one?
Yeah. I'm going to have to ask our producer to get this up on the screen so our viewers at home can see it. This looks like it's the class of 1967 planting a tree outside the door of the pub at Rosaria Center.
Yeah, that's what she said on the back, but where that is, that's where the gym is now. Actually, that tree, we dug that up and moved it to Seton, so I'll have to get the label on it now that I've got that photograph.
I see.
Yeah, so it is on campus, but it's not where it was in 1967.
I love the outfits, the hats and the white gloves. I mean, Lady Di ate your heart out.
Really?
Yeah, that's a wonderful shot. Can I take that back to the office and keep it in our files. The class of 1967, anybody who's watching, you can look forward to seeing that at your homecoming next year. You celebrate your 20th anniversary. My goodness, does it seem like 20 years ago? 1967?
No, sure doesn't.
Almost. Carol, how does somebody go about managing to plant to organize a tree planting ceremony? What's the first step?
Well, usually people call me, but they should either call the Alumnae office or they can call my office. And if they want it as a memorial planting, or if they want it, some people just want a gift tree with their name on it. They like to see it in print. Lots of times societies, like the Education Society one year gave us a tree, or if someone's graduating and they just want to leave one, just let us know. We'll ask sometimes if they have a preference. Generally, I try and pick the species because I know what I'd like to have in the collection. But if someone really has their heart set on something specific, then we try and accommodate them. And we usually try and accommodate them as far as location goes too, but actually we're getting well treed, and it's to the point where we've got to be pretty careful where we put things now.
I see. So the class of 1986 has already spoken to me about wanting to plant a tree. Have they come to see you yet?
Not yet.
Well, there's 2 senior class presidents who are on their way to see you because I told them that they should talk to you about it. And is it expensive to plant a tree, Carol?
No, actually it's very inexpensive. It's usually less than $100, and that includes a plaque. And on campus we usually tend to go to wooden lettered plaques made with a cutting machine rather than little brass ones, because brass has a way of disappearing these days, and these wooden ones are easily replaced if anything happens to them. But the incidence of them going elsewhere is very, very small.
Well, the wooden ones are nice and large too, so you can see rather than getting on your hands and knees and having to look so closely. Yeah. So how many do you reckon you've planted since you
How many
planting?
trees in total? Oh, thousands.
Thousands,
oh,
really.
Yes.
And you've removed some of the older ones.
Yeah, we've cut some down. And this spring, actually, people think that trees last forever and ever, but they don't. And part of the original Academy planting, which is in that section of trees along the Bedford Highway, there's a few there that have to come down. There's some at Rosaria. As they either get to the stage where they're unhealthy and drop a lot of branches and become dangerous, or actually just die out, we have to remove them. But of course they're always being replaced.
Yeah, well that's the nice part about it. I know that there often are alumni who come back to the campus, and it means a great deal to them to see a tree that they recognize. Oh, I remember this tree. And it means that, especially I get this a lot from the big pine tree that's right across from where my office is in Everestus Hall, and of course that beautiful ash tree near Seton. I know at the time before, of course, the disastrous fire here at the Mount in 1951, there had been some beautiful rose gardens and things of that nature, but there really still are quite a few trees left from that time, are there?
There are a lot of shade trees left from that time. When they built the mother house up the hill, they dug out quite a few and took them up there.
Oh, that was a good idea.
Oh, so it's funny. I see old photographs with these trees, and I know which ones they are that are up at the mother house now.
And they would have originally come from the Academy grounds down here at the... Right. Carol, I understand we can still hear you as a regular contributor to CBC, to the morning information morning program.
Yes, with Dawn Conley and Dawn Tremaine. Yes, I've been on there for a couple of years. It's a lot of fun. I really like working with those guys.
Well, you make it sound like a lot of fun. I think a lot of people who ordinarily may not have been interested in gardening are out dusting off their bulbs and getting
ready.
Yeah, getting in shape for the season. You're going to be busy now in a couple of months' time.
Oh, in less than a couple of months, we'll be very busy.
Yeah, and you're taking off for the sunny south.
Yay.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful time.
Thanks.
And I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I know that the viewers will be glad to get a look at a lady that they hear a lot from.
Really?
And I'd like to say to the viewers, thank you for tuning in again to the Alumni Special, and we'll see you here next week again.